Thank you all for coming today and braving the chillier weather and coming to see our new brand activation, which we're all very excited about. Next, I want to talk to you a little bit about what is behind that brand. What are the things that we're doing? And I'm going to start with a little bit of history. Try not to bore you too much with some of the background, but I think it's important to put all of this in context of what Lincoln Park Zoo is, what it was, and what it will be in the future. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually the 149th anniversary of Lincoln Park Zoo's existence, so next year will be a big one for us. But probably one of the major milestones, I think, in the history of Lincoln Park Zoo was actually in 1995, when Lincoln Park Zoo went from being a part of the Chicago Park District to being sort of managed now, operated by the Lincoln Park Zoological Society. And that may not seem connected, but it actually is very connected, because one of the things when we were a city department at that point in time, the Park District and the city is primarily interested in recreation, secondarily maybe a little bit in education. And when we went private, it really allowed us to set our future as an organization also that was committed to conservation science, animal welfare, as well as community engagement. To give you sort of an example of how that happened over the years, in 1995, we had a director and a second sort of assistant director in our conservation science department. That was it. We had 2 people. Today, I think our numbers are over 40 people in that department, making it one of the largest conservation science departments in the country. The way that sort of formed over the years is we looked for areas with our scientists that we have on board, areas where we could make a significant impact on conservation, on saving species around the globe, as well as saving species right here in Illinois around the Chicago area. And of course, the key to saving any species is not just working with the species, but working with the communities that are where these species come from, because they have to be part of the process for these programs to be successful. So this growth in conservation and science is now mirrored by growth in our learning and engagement departments. We're working out in the communities, talking to people about the wildlife that they have right in their own backyard. And it was because of, in the early days, as we started to grow our programs in epidemiology and endocrinology, certainly the Fisher Center is world-renowned for conservation study of great apes. But as we started looking at some of the species we're working with right in the Chicagoland area, we started to realize that there was another niche that really wasn't being investigated, certainly by other zoos and aquariums or conservation organizations, and that was the conflicts that occur in urban areas here in Chicago and around the globe between an expanding urban environment and the animals that are now living in those urban areas with us, with the people. So we had the idea about 7 years ago to set up what we now call the Urban Wildlife Institute, which was really looking at those conflicts between animals and people in urban areas. It started out, and I think as I sketched out what I thought that program should be, I had some really grand notions of what it could be. But fortunately, we have great scientists at Lincoln Park Zoo who kind of put me in my place and said, well, those are great, but we really need to start at the beginning. We need to start looking at what animals are even in these public spaces that we're sharing the space with. And so our urban wildlife team has, over the last 6 or 7 years, been collecting that data so that they could figure out, okay, what actually are the conflicts that we're looking at? What are the species we're looking with, and where are they? And how can we start to minimize those conflicts? So that in itself was, I think, a huge beginning to build up this database, and Seth will talk about it in a couple of minutes. But then the next obvious step for us as we started to get this data in is, well, okay, so we're learning a lot about Chicago, but every city in the United States is facing the same problem, maybe with different species, but they're facing the same problems. So how can we take the science that we developed here at Lincoln Park, the model for examining wildlife in urban areas, how can we take that and move that national? So what you're going to hear about today, and I'm going to let Seth talk about it, is now a national network, soon to be an international network, to, again, look at all these urban areas and help us develop public policy that helps protect the animals and provide a better life for the people living in those cities. Research has shown that in urban areas where the public has the opportunity to engage with wildlife, to have green spaces, their lives are better. And so we want to create better environments for the people, and we want to create better environments for the animals in these urban areas. So now to get to the details of what that means, I'm very excited to introduce Seth Magli. Dr. Magli is the director of our Urban Wildlife Institute here. Great scientist. I've learned a lot from Seth, and I'm really proud to have him leading the Urban Wildlife team going forward into the future. So, Seth, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the network.
Thank you, Kevin. You're going to see in a moment that we have these partners who are waiting very patiently here on the screen. Hi guys. And I'm going to give them a chance to talk about their own programs and how they're partnering with us. But first, I did want to give a little more detail into this network we're building and why we're building it. For nearly 7 years, Lincoln Park Zoo's Urban Wildlife Institute has been deploying state-of-the-art technology across Chicago and the suburbs to try to better understand the wildlife that shared this ecosystem. The goal, though, has always been to help humans and wildlife to coexist in cities all around the world. Over time, using techniques including camera traps, bird counts, and ultrasonic bat detectors, we've collected a massive repository of urban wildlife data, including over 2 million images from camera traps. We collect data in all 4 seasons at over 100 field stations, including city parks, forest preserves, golf courses, and cemeteries, in order to assemble a complete and thorough account of urban biodiversity. So we've learned an incredible amount about wildlife in Chicago, but to date, only Chicago. To expand the scope of this critical work, our scientists began to seek partners across the globe to help learn about wildlife in other urban settings. So today, the Lincoln Park Zoo's Urban Wildlife Institute is proud to announce the formation of a nationwide network for urban wildlife research that we call the Urban Wildlife Information Network, or UWIN, or UWIN. This unprecedented network will expand our study of urban biodiversity to, at the moment, 8 cities across the United States, which include Los Angeles, Austin, Texas, Denver, Fort Collins, Indianapolis, Madison, Wisconsin, and Manhattan, Kansas. The Urban Wildlife Institute has collected the world's largest urban wildlife data set, but with the creation of UWIN, this data set will expand exponentially, which will represent the world's largest urban wildlife monitoring infrastructure. Today, the zoo also launches its new vision for the future. The zoo is dedicated to projects like this network that help conserve wildlife in our own backyard and across the globe. This type of work has never been done before on this scale, and with this network we can expand our knowledge of how wildlife navigate cities and persist in the heart of human development. Most importantly, UWIN allows us to, for the first time, examine the similarities and differences between wildlife in different cities. We know that Chicago is different from Austin, and we expect, for example, that Chicago's coyotes will behave differently than Austin's coyotes, but nonetheless, we also believe we will find similarities. And once we know those similarities, those universal patterns of urban wildlife behavior and how they generate human-wildlife conflict, we can use that information to inform city planning and management. And for the first time, we can create a blueprint to build truly wildlife-friendly cities. The Urban Wildlife Institute has long been committed to mitigating human-wildlife conflict and to encourage harmonious cohabitation with local species. Our projects not only conserve biodiversity, but also encourage people to connect with nature and appreciate urban biodiversity. With innovative approaches such as our Chicago Wildlife Watch website at chicagowildlifewatch.org, anyone, regardless of their background, can connect to our research and help identify wildlife from our camera traps while learning about local species. Several of our partners are planning similar outreach projects in their own cities. Projects like this one, as well as our work with local classrooms through programs like Partners in Fieldwork, exemplify our dedication to all inhabitants of the urban ecosystem. This is reflected in the zoo's new tagline, "For Wildlife, for All." Now, this national expansion would not be possible without our partners and their tireless efforts to help create a better world for people and wildlife. So now I'm going to turn it over to those partners to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their own programs, give their name and title, and let us know what they've been up to. So let's see, why don't we start with you, Amy?
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Belair. I'm here in Austin, Texas, at the Wild Basin Creative Research Center at St. Edward's University. We just joined this partnership, and we are setting up our first round of cameras starting next week, actually. So we're very excited to start to dig into this. Austin really prides itself on being a very wildlife-friendly city with abundant green spaces and access to nature for people. And so we're really excited to dig into the research on this and see how Austin is doing and how other cities can become more wildlife friendly.
That's great. Thank you so much. Laurel, could you go next?
Hi, yes, I'm Laurel Hartley. I'm an associate professor at the University of Colorado in Denver, which is in the heart of downtown Denver. We've been part of UWIN for a little bit less than a year. We've deployed the cameras once with great success, over 2,000 images, and we're about to deploy them again next week, or in 2 weeks. And we're super excited to be part of the UWIN because our ultimate goal is to turn this project into a course-based research experience for students. So right now, my graduate student is getting it up and running, but then it'll be turned over to a course with undergraduates. And we're excited about that because there's so much data to explore from different places, and it's an authentic research experience for students that they don't often get right when they first enter college. And we're also excited because University of Colorado Denver is an urban university, and our students really like Denver and they really like wildlife. So that's two things about our student population, and that this marries them both, and it's going to be of great interest to them.
Thank you. Carmen.
Yes. Hi, I'm Carmen Salisbury, and I'm a professor of biological sciences at Butler University. And I think maybe Butler might have been the first city to jump on board with Seth and his team. We've been with the program for about 2 years, almost 2 years. And so we've done a full year, at least, of deployments. And we're really excited. We have more photos than we know what to do with at the moment. So we're busy categorizing those photos with great excitement. We, are really proud and happy to be part of this network. We understand, like all of you probably, that, as the world becomes more urbanized, we need to do a better job at understanding that urban ecosystem so we can be better stewards of the ecosystem. And, maybe, and just, as I said, live better lives within it. We've done a lot of things that this program has helped us branch into a lot of different areas with regard to outreach and curriculum development. We're incorporating the image, sort of categorizing images into our introductory biology course, our ecology and evolutionary biology course. So students will be helping us actually tag photos, which we're excited about. We're also have a student that's working with us. I should also my other colleagues, Dr. Travis Ryan and Dr. Julia Engstman, are working with us as well, working together as a team on this. And we have a student who actually got a Hendricks Scholarship through Butler to do his own spin-off project based on the camera traps, which we're really excited about. And we're this summer going to be starting a big outreach program with 18 schools in Indianapolis, working with teachers. We're going to provide a workshop for them and cameras so that they can actually deploy cameras along with our team and then develop curricular modules that they can use to teach about urban wildlife in sort of K through 12 range of education. So we're really excited about all of those. And without this project and being invited to join the project, none of this would have probably ever happened. So we're happy to be a part of it.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate everything that you do with us and generally for wildlife in cities. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions from the press for myself or for our guests. Sure.
So can you give us an example of like some city planning policy that might come out of this new network?
Yeah, so the question was about what city policy and planning may come out of this new network. That's absolutely the ultimate goal, is that we're trying to understand wildlife behavior and then use that to modify the way we build parks, the way we build buildings, the way we create cities to create a place for wildlife. So robust examples may include something as simple as what type of vegetation maybe you may build in different parks to attract different birds or mammals, or it could have to do with how do we distribute our neighborhoods to allow for corridors and connectivity between sites. So I really think that it could have implications at all those different scales of planning and design. I don't know if any of you had anything that you want to add to that? All right, they look happy.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Other questions?
Since this started, have you seen anything that has, I guess, surprised you, or did you think you already had a pretty good handle on what was happening?
Yeah, speaking for the work that we do here in Chicago, I think the most surprising thing to us when we started the study was just the biodiversity that we have present in the Chicago metropolitan area. I think we knew we were going to detect and study things like raccoons and skunks, but out in the suburbs we were surprised to detect things like mink and flying squirrel. And I think a lot of people don't understand that Chicago actually has a tremendous amount of biodiversity and species that really are worth our attention and our energies. How about you guys? What surprising things have come out of your own studies so far?
I would definitely say that the biodiversity is definitely that's the first thing that came to mind. We're always surprised when we look at photos from cameras that are right in smack in urban areas where we really frankly thought we wouldn't see much of anything but a few squirrels here and there. And we're seeing quite a diversity of things. And not only that, but we're actually intrigued by the types of interactions that are potentially possible between different species, because we often will get photos with multiple animals that are there at night, for example. And so I think we find that all very interesting point, and we're anxious to score more of our photos to see what else is out there.
I'll get back to you, Laurel, I promise.
Did you start? I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to echo the previous comment. In downtown Denver, we've got a big amusement park called Elitch Gardens, and we have a camera near Elitch Gardens, and I thought the same thing. We may see a squirrel or two, maybe a bird fly by, a bunch of teenagers, but it was surprising to me to see these great pictures of coyote, foxes, a badger with the giant iconic roller coaster right behind it. I did not expect to see that.
I was actually going to ask for specific examples of the kinds of wildlife you're seeing in your areas, and that really answered my question.
All right. Yeah. So to repeat the question, it was about specific wildlife seen in different areas, and I think Laurel addressed that. But I don't know, Amy or Carmen, if you have any other specific stories.
I would just add, we have had cameras up so far at one of our sites in Austin, the Wild Basin Creative Research Center, which is around 10-minute drive from the Capitol here in Austin. And we've had those up, and I think, just to echo what the other two have said, I think all of us were surprised at the diversity that we were seeing. I think once we start to look into the diversity within urban ecosystems, we're always surprised at what we find, and I think all of us are seeing that. I guess at Wild Basin, at the preserver, we've had some cameras. We have had coyotes, we've had bobcats, armadillo, probably a unique species here in Texas that we would find on our cameras. Birds flying by. It's been really exciting to sort through all of those images.
And one of the things that's kind of interesting, I think, thus far, and like I said, we have more categorizing to do, but I know in Chicago, you all have had photos of skunks, striped skunks, I presume, and we have yet to find one. And so I think this sort of sets us up to look at those kind of cross urban areas, comparisons. And it's really curious to us why they are, they're known to be in this area, yet we're not picking them up on our cameras, but we're picking up some of the same other characters, coyotes. We're finding mink. We have some really lovely pictures of hawks hunting. In fact, we have a great series of a sharp-shinned hawk sitting on a log. It comes back with a rabbit in its talons, and so there's some really neat things that we're finding in these urban areas that were surprising. But the difference in distribution, I think, is also going to be an interesting thing between the urban areas.
Just wanted to say that I think that for too long there's been this idea, not just from the public, but honestly from conservationists and scientists, that cities aren't worth our time and our study because there's just not anything interesting that lives there. And I think that the more we look into these urban systems we've built, the more we discover that that's absolutely not the case. We can do an enormous amount of conservation in our backyards if we just try. Yep.
Sorry. How long before you can take the information that you gathered and turn it into real, not legislative, that's not the right word, but so it gets to the right people, the developers, to do what you need to do to continue the coexistence in a harmonious way?
Yeah, so the question is about how long, are we going to need to collect data before we'll be able to turn those data into policy recommendations? And I think that the answer to that is, well, first of all, that we're going to do it as quickly as we can, but it's probably going to be a year or more before we really have enough data to dig into. But once that happens, I think relatively rapidly, particularly if we partner, for example, with landscape architects, with urban designers, with people who really are on the ground building cities, then I think within a few years we should be able to start making some relatively concrete recommendations about things we can do. And then, as I mentioned before, we can scale that up. We can start small and scale that up eventually to the level of entire metropolitan areas.
Did you sort of have any role in the city adopting more of a hands-off policy toward coyotes last year? Were you advising Alderman Hopkins or anything like that?
Yeah, the question was about the city's policy that's relatively hands-off towards coyotes. And yes, we have been consulted on some level about that. We do, of course, study coyotes heavily within the city, and we are interested in reducing conflict. But honestly, coyotes are not a big conflict species based on our data. They're not really creating a lot of problems with people. And in fact are probably fulfilling a pretty interesting ecological role in urban landscapes, including Chicago. So yeah, we were in support of that. Kevin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things, Seth. One is, I know you've already been working with Chicago Park District and Chicago City of Chicago and some of the green spaces that they're creating, like Norway Island and whatnot. The other thing, about the question about policy and when do we take it, we're already getting calls from architects. Jeannie Gang called me not that long ago about understanding that we're doing this work, and as they get into designs, they want to keep on top of this so that their designs, we don't have to wait till we have all the data. We can already start having an impact.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kevin. And here in Chicago, I think, yes, as Kevin just said, we're already involved in the Mayor's Committee for Nature and Wildlife, in numerous other organizations, and we are consulted by different forest preserve districts, park districts on those developments. But the exciting thing about this network, about UWIN, is that for the first time, we'll have the data to be able to make recommendations beyond Chicago that may be nationwide and eventually worldwide once we compare patterns between these very different urban areas.
How is this project going to affect the experience of just, young children that come to the zoo? Is this interactive in any way?
Yeah, so the question is about whether this program is interactive at all. And we are absolutely committed to connecting our research to the public. And one example of how we do that is through our website, Chicago Wildlife Watch, which any person can log on to and immediately become part of our research. Some of our partners are planning similar types of outreach. We also do outreach to school groups through a Partners in Fieldwork programs, which reach underserved high school communities. But we're always looking for new ways to connect the public. And I was just over at the Wild Horizons exhibit, and I think that is a neat way for people to see how urban areas function as ecosystems just like ecosystems in Tanzania do. So we're going to continue to be innovative and to work with our learning department here at the zoo to find ways to connect this research to people, not just in Chicago, but all around the country.
Seth, can you spell your last name and give your title again?
Sure, yeah. My name is Seth Magli. That's Magle, and I'm the director of the Urban Wildlife Institute at the Lincoln Park Zoo. I'm also the executive director of the Urban Wildlife Information Network.
Have you noticed any population trends, or do you have enough data to?
Yeah, the question was about population trends. So absolutely, we have noticed some trends in different populations. Just a few examples are that in Chicago, the coyote population seemed to be strongly on the rise. The fox population seemed to be declining. We assume those two things are probably linked, but we're going to need a little more research to conclude that. But one of the exciting things about having a data set that we collect in all seasons and in an ongoing way is that we can rapidly see some of these kinds of trends. So for example, Carmen was talking about skunks a minute ago. I have it happen all the time that people call me and say, gosh, it seems like my neighborhood's overrun overrun with skunks. Is that what you're seeing across the city? And we can look and find the answer to that question. So our work is not intended to be strictly theoretical. It's very applied, and we really want our research to be useful to the community, not just the community of wildlife ecologists, but to all of us who live with wildlife. Yeah, Kevin.
Stop for a second. I mean, it's always been intriguing to me. At the south end of the zoo, we had a concrete pond, lagoon, that was there for many, many years. And then we created Nature Boardwalk, and now we're seeing species appear that I hadn't seen for 20 years in Chicago. So it's sort of, you know, if you build it, they will come. So that's another kind of impact I think that the program can have.
Yeah, good point, Kevin. Kevin's question is about Nature Boardwalk. And Nature Boardwalk for us is absolutely an amazing living laboratory that shows us what we can do in urban areas. I think that when it was built, people thought, well, it's not really that much area. You're not really going to see that many species that use it in a city. But we see more and more species using that space every year, mammals, birds. Now the state's largest colony of black-crowned night herons, which are a state endangered species, nest in and near Nature Boardwalk. So it shows you that with a little bit of time and energy and innovation, you can actually create incredibly robust, valuable wildlife habitat, even in the heart of a city like Chicago. Well, if there's no other questions, I'd really like to thank our partners. Thank you all so much for being part of this. Really appreciate you.